Pokemon, that classic monster catching game from the 90s known around the globe. Since its debut, there are some ways in which Pokemon has noticeably changed. Not always for the better.
So we're really happy to finally be able to reveal Dynamax.
But there are also many ways in which the Pokemon of today is still very similar to the original games released in 1996. One thing that has remained mostly constant over the series' 26-year run is what actually makes a Pokemon a Pokemon. They have base stats, learn moves, get access to between 1 and 3 abilities, and have 1 to 2 types. Just like school kids in an introductory computer class, we're going to be focusing on typing. Now, Pokemon types have changed a lot over the years. Since Red and Blue, 3 additional types have been added, and there have been numerous changes to the relationships between the existing types. One thing that hasn't changed, however, is that dastardly upper limit. There has never been a Pokemon that can have more than 2 types. Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm so interested to know what would happen if a Pokemon were allowed to have 3 types. If only there was a bearded man with numerous accolades in competitive Pokemon to teach me. Well, beloved viewer, you're in luck. Before I share my thoughts, I'd like to know what you all think about the topic. Which Pokemon do you think deserves a 3rd type, and what type would you give them? I hope you've been enjoying the content lately. I've been focusing a lot on the quality, and I hope that's apparent. If you do enjoy these videos, please consider subscribing. Currently, only about 8% of my audience is subscribed, and it would be great if you'd help me raise that number up a bit. I'm really passionate about Pokemon, and I want to help show more people what's so special about it. We're also getting close to our 500,000 subscriber special. Anyway, let's talk more about typing. You might be wondering, what do a Pokemon's types actually do? The short answer is 2 things. First, a Pokemon's typing determines damage multipliers. A Fire-type Pokemon takes double damage from water attacks, half from grass, and neutral from electric. Second, a Pokemon's type will loosely determine the moves it can learn. Every Pokemon learns moves that don't match their type, but most Pokemon primarily learn moves matching one of their types. Now, any move used that is the same type as the user gets a 50% damage boost, also known as same type attack bonus, or stab for short. Just like its real-life counterpart, stab is a big deal, but we'll talk more about that later. So why is it that Game Freak hasn't added Pokemon with more than 2 types yet? As I am definitely not 3 Pikachu in a wolf suit, I can't say for certain, but I do have some theories. Adding more types makes the game more complicated. Pokemon, especially as of recent games, has been designed for the lowest common denominator to be able to beat the game. Players already need to remember not only the intricate type chart, but also the individual typing of the Pokemon they fight against. And adding to the game's complexity may go against Game Freak's design philosophy. It's also possible that adding a 3rd type to lots of Pokemon could end up being overwhelming or game-breaking. But adding a 3rd type to only a handful of Pokemon is likely to have either not enough impact or make a small subset of Pokemon way too powerful. Lastly, adding new types to existing Pokemon would be a very dramatic change in a series known for its familiarity. Mechanics like Mega Evolution, Z-moves, and Dynamax can all be easily phased out as a generational gimmick, unlike something like allowing Pokemon to have additional types. So there's many reasons why Game Freak might not want to add a 3rd type, but nobody here gives a heck about that. What you're here for is me, King of the Monkeys, and my opinion is law in Monkeyland. There are 2 reasons why Game Freak can't afford to add a 3rd type to Pokemon. One very minor that has an easy fix, and one major with no clear workaround. First, the minor issue. At present, a Pokemon with 2 types weak to the same attacking type is a huge liability. Pokemon like Ferrothorn, Gastrodon, and Gyarados have all been good at one time or another since Sword and Shield's release, but they require very careful positioning and play in order to ensure their 4 times weaknesses don't send them back to their Pokeball preemptively. Adding a 3rd type means there is now a possibility of all 3 types sharing a weakness. Picture a Pokemon like Camerupt, presently ground and fire type. If Camerupt were to gain the rock type, not only would it have almost no chance of surviving even the weakest water move, but it's even possible that it could be knocked out from full HP through Protect. In Generation 7 and 8, using a Z-move or a Max move into a Pokemon that had used Protect results in a quarter of the move's damage still going through. For Pokemon with an 8 times weakness, this is the equivalent of an unprotected, super effective move landing, which, when considering that the moves that deal damage through Protect almost always have a high base power, should be enough to knock out most Pokemon. Now, this isn't the biggest deal in the world, as Game Freak could simply not design Pokemon that have 3 shared weaknesses, but it does apply restrictions in a way that don't currently exist with Pokemon types. The real issue, though, lies not in the defense of our hypothetical additional 3rd type, but with the offense. I am very smart, and I know about an incredibly advanced and never utilized technique known to scholars of the mind like myself as foreshadowing. You all probably missed it earlier, but I actually utilized this never before seen literary device on you here. Just like its real life counterpart, stab is a big deal, but we'll talk more about that later. Well, good viewers, the time has come. Let's talk about the real reason Game Freak can't give Pokemon a third type from a game balance standpoint. Stab gives Pokemon a 50% damage increase if the move they use shares a type with them. I know not all of you are as in the weeds as me when it comes to competitive Pokemon, so let's talk about how much this actually matters. To understand how impactful this damage boost is, let's talk about some popular items that boost damage. First, some items give boosts to only a certain type of moves, like Mystic Water boosting water type attacks or Miracle Seed boosting grass. These items offer a damage boost of 20% without any drawback. The item Expert Belt also gives a 20% damage boost, but only to moves that are super effective. Next in terms of power is the Life Orb. Life Orb increases damage dealt by 30%, but whenever the Pokemon does damage, they lose 10% of their maximum HP, which is a significant drawback. The final form of items that boost damage are the Choice Band and Choice Specs items, giving a 50% boost to all physical and special moves respectively. These items are considered so powerful that in order to balance them, a Pokemon holding one can only use the first move they select until they switch out, balancing a large power trade-off with stark inflexibility. Now, consider the fact that Stab, like the choice items, boosts damage output by 50% without a serious drawback. This would be a major buff, and one that frankly, the game isn't built to handle at the moment. Everything has been designed around the fact that a Pokemon has two types. And listen, I'm not saying that the game is balanced perfectly. Okay, I'm not saying it's balanced decently. Alright, I'm not going to say that it's balanced, but I can at least say that allowing Pokemon to gain a third type would certainly break things. Another thing to consider is that Pokemon can only learn 4 moves. At present, most Pokemon that aren't support Pokemon typically run Protect, at least one stab move, and then some combination of coverage moves, the remaining stab move if they have multiple types, or utility moves. For Pokemon with 3 types, I fear the movesets would be very homogeneous. Protect, Stab 1, Stab 2, Stab 3. Uh-oh, you goons just got foreshadowed again. Guess what we're going to talk about now? Items. You probably already forgot, but those items we were talking about earlier, yeah, they also work with Stab, and they're multiplicative. A Pokemon using a Stab move while holding a choice item will be at 225% of the original move's power, and that's before considering any other help like weather or stat boosts. Now, to be fair, this already can happen with 2 types, but there's a major difference between having 2 stab moves and 3. To understand why, let's ground our analysis in examples. Take a Pokemon like Mamoswine. With ground and ice stabs, Mamoswine is able to hit every Pokemon with only 1 type for neutral or super effective damage. No single type in the game resists both ground and ice. More than that though, Mamoswine is able to hit over half of all Pokemon ever created for super effective damage. If a Pokemon were made with ground, ice, and fighting type, it would be able to hit over 2/3 of all Pokemon ever created for super effective damage. And Pokemon like Rotom Wash, which are able to resist Mamoswine stabs, would no longer be effective against the new fighting moves. In other words, a Pokemon that is fighting, ice, and ground hits more Pokemon for super effective damage, and has fewer reliable defensive answers. Of course, Pokemon like Mamoswine and Glastrier can already run this combination of offensive moves, but without Stab they are far less effective when hitting opposing Pokemon for neutral damage. On a Pokemon like Mamoswine, for example, Stab is going to be the difference between KOing Rotom Wash in 2 hits instead of 3. I don't want you to think I'm nitpicking and biased, as Mamoswine not only has notoriously good offensive coverage, but also doesn't make any sense to give fighting coverage too. So let's look at another example. Flygon is dragon and ground type, but you could make a rather compelling argument that it should be bug type instead of ground. Let's look at what happens if Flygon were made into a dragon, bug, and ground type Pokemon. With dragon and ground, Flygon is able to hit 6 individual types for super effective damage, and no one individual type resists both dragon and ground. It also hits just under 1/3 of all Pokemon for super effective damage. You might expect that adding the bug type, considered the worst type in the game, might not do much for Flygon, and you would be very wrong. Giving Flygon Bug Stab allows it to hit almost half of all Pokemon with its stab moves, in contrast to less than 1/3 before. Bug does more than simply broaden the spectrum of Pokemon Flygon can threaten with super effective attacks. Dragon is one of the best types in the game, and Bug the worst. And yet some popular dragon attacks like Draco Meteor and Outrage have notable drawbacks. Giving Flygon access to moves like Stab, Bug Buzz, and U-Turn would allow it more security in attacking when facing off against Pokemon like Rotom Wash or Rillaboom. To be clear, I'm not saying that adding the bug type to Flygon would make it the strongest Pokemon ever created. In fact, I'm confident that it would still be worse than Landorus T. However, it should be clear that giving Flygon an additional type significantly improves its viability. Flygon is a Pokemon that is lackluster in most formats of competitive Pokemon, but with this change, it would likely become a very meaningful threat in formats with lower power levels. And keep in mind that for this example, I intentionally picked a Pokemon that isn't classically considered strong. Imagine giving a third type to a Pokemon already on top of the metagame. Even though I don't think Pokemon can realistically add a third type in a healthy way, I do still think it's fun to think about, and in the process of working on my research for this video, I came up with a number of Pokemon that I thought thematically could have a third type. I'll go through them now and share how good I think each of them would be, but I'm also interested in whether or not I missed anything, so let me know in the comments what you think. Our first Pokemon is arguably one of the most iconic Pokemon of all time, Charizard. Many players, myself included, think of Charizard as a dragon, to the extent where they even gave Charizard a Mega Evolution that was Dragon and Fire instead of its original Flying and Fire typing. If Game Freak were to introduce Pokemon with 3 types, I think Charizard would be candidate number 1. And it should be obvious why, when you consider that Charizard has been given pretty much every possible generational gimmick, and even has 2 different Mega Evolutions. So how good would a Fire, Flying, and Dragon Charizard be? Defensively, the Dragon type adds weaknesses to Ice and Dragon, and removes Charizard's resistance to Fairy, but also gives Charizard a triple resistance to Grass, a double resistance to Fire, and a neutral relationship with Water and Electric. I would say that defensively, this Charizard is a lot stronger, as it loses its weaknesses to Water and Electric and only gains an Ice weakness, and Charizard is very threatening to Ice-type Pokemon. Offensively, these 3 types actually don't synergize super well. Adding the Dragon type to a Pokemon only allows it to hit more Pokemon for neutral damage, in addition to opposing Dragon types for super effective, and Charizard already excels at dealing neutral damage. The main Pokemon Charizard struggles with are specially defensive Water and Rock types, and while Dragon coverage is somewhat useful, it isn't as useful as the Grass moves Charizard normally runs. To summarize, I think that this would be an improvement to Charizard's defenses, but likely wouldn't change the standard set of Fire move, Flying move, Solar Beam, and Protect, making it a surprisingly balanced change. Another clear beneficiary of a third type is Gyarados. Gyarados, like Charizard, is a Pokemon that looks like it should be Dragon type, despite its Water and Flying typing. In a ludicrous bait and switch, Gyarados' Mega Evolution changed its type in an unexpected way, turning it into a Water and Dark type Pokemon. I, for one, think that was stupid, and for this video, I will be taking a look at what would happen if Gyarados were a Water, Flying, and Dragon type Pokemon. First, let's take a look at what this does to Gyarados defensively. Gyarados at present has a weakness to Rock and a double weakness to Electric. Adding the Dragon typing would turn the double weakness into only a single weakness for Electric, and add weaknesses to Dragon, Ice, and Fairy. It would also provide a resistance to Grass, and double resistances to Water and Fire. Double resistances are a big deal in competitive Pokemon, as they often function very similar to immunities, and allow your Pokemon more ease when switching in or winning 1v1s. Overall, I think this is a positive change defensively, as Gyarados loses its extremely detrimental double weakness to Electric and gains helpful resistances in exchange for 3 new weaknesses. Offensively, this is a massive buff for Gyarados. One of the main weaknesses of Gyarados is that its only physical flying type attack worth using is Bounce, a 2-turn attack that is not only easy to play around, but also inaccurate. Typically, Gyarados runs Protect, Dragon Dance, Waterfall, and Bounce, though Bounce is so inconsistent that players have opted to run Taunt instead at times. The lack of a good physical flying move has relegated Gyarados to mediocrity, only really being strong when the power level of formats was low, and there were ways around the reliance on Bounce in the form of Z-moves and Dynamax. With this change, I think Gyarados would be far easier to use. Dragon Claw would serve as a reliable option against the Water, Grass, and Dragon types that resist Waterfall, and would allow Gyarados to be less reliant on Dynamax or a well-positioned Z-move to shine. Our next Pokemon is especially egregious, Lugia. Lugia is a Psychic and Flying type Pokemon whose Pokedex entries all have to do with it being the Guardian of the Sea. Now, I'm not a scientist, but last time I checked, the sea was made of water. In fact, I'm relatively confident that nearly every Pokemon that lives underwater is shocking Water type. The fact that Lugia isn't a water type has always frustrated me. So what better way to remedy the issue than by giving it a third type? A water, flying, and psychic type Lugia would be interesting. Defensively, Lugia ends up with weaknesses to rock, ghost, dark, and a 4 times weakness to electric, and resistances to water, psychic, steel, fire, and an immunity to ground. Lugia's primary strength competitively is its bulk. The ability multi-scale makes it near impossible to knock out from full HP, and although it lacks in offensive power, it aims to make up for it with speed, utility, and survivability. This is the first Pokemon we've talked about where I feel that adding a third type hurts more than it helps. Although water is one of the best types in the game, turning Lugia's weakness to electric into a double weakness is a massive deal, as it opens a glaring hole in Lugia's defensive abilities. Offensively, adding a third type never hurts. Lugia goes from being able to hit about a quarter of Pokemon for super effective damage to over 40%, a sizable increase. In terms of individual types, neither Psychic or Flying are able to hit Steel Pokemon for neutral damage, which Water remedies. Water also doubles the number of individual types that Lugia is able to hit for super effective damage, going from 4 types to 8. If Lugia gained access to Scald, I think a set of Calm Mind, Scald, Roost, and Aeroblast would be usable in competitive Pokemon. Granted, I don't think it would be amazing. Overall, this change would be mostly relevant from a lore and design perspective, and wouldn't do much to lift Lugia out of mediocrity competitively. There's 2 more Pokemon I want to cover here, and they're a pair of legendary Pokemon. Solgaleo and Lunala are meant to represent the sun and the moon, and yet Solgaleo isn't fire type, and Lunala isn't dark type. Let's take a look at what happens if we rectify that. A fire, steel, and psychic Solgaleo is interesting defensively. Before changes, Solgaleo is weak to fire, dark, ghost, and ground. The addition of the fire type makes the ground weakness double, and turns the fire weakness into a water weakness instead. The 4 times weakness to ground is a big deal, but overall I think these changes help more than they hurt. Steel resists the rock type attacks fire is weak to, and fire resists the fire attacks steel is weak to. When we look at the resistances, we see something terrifying. Our Thermal Kitty boasts resistances to normal, flying, dragon, and bug, double resistances to steel, grass, ice, fairy, and psychic, and an immunity to poison. This is an absurd combination of resistances. We touched earlier on how having a double resistance is in many cases very similar to having an immunity to a type. Giving a Pokemon with good natural bulk 5 double resistances and an immunity is ridiculous. The amount of Pokemon who would seriously struggle to touch Solgaleo is astronomical, and when you consider that it would have 3 stab types and an ability that prevents opponents from lowering its stats, it's clear that this Pokemon would not be balanced in the slightest. Speaking of Solgaleo's offenses, let's take a look at what adding fire does to our feline friend. Originally, Solgaleo is able to hit 5 types for super effective damage and 26% of all Pokemon created. Adding fire allows Solgaleo to now damage 8 individual types for super effective damage, and 43% of all Pokemon. Solgaleo was already a good Pokemon. It wasn't the strongest legendary, but it's seen a fair bit of play since its debut and is typically ranked towards the middle of the pack when considering viable legendary Pokemon. Adding the fire type would likely skyrocket its viability, as it gains a very valuable tool to hit steel type Pokemon which have walled it thus far. Solgaleo already gets access to powerful fire type attacks like Flare Blitz, so we don't even need to speculate about its move pool. Solgaleo would likely function as a bulky Trick Room setter and attacker, as well as a weakness policy Dynamax sweeper. I expect it would be extremely popular, especially when you consider that fire allows it a positive matchup against the current strongest legendary Pokemon, Zacian. Finally, let's talk about Solgaleo's counterpart, Lunala. Lunala is a quiet legendary Pokemon, in that it doesn't seem like people have strong feelings about it one way or the other, and it's rarely in the discussion for strongest legendaries. However, the 1 year it was legal, Lunala won the Pokemon World Championships despite its double weakness to Dark and Incineroar being on 80% of all teams, so I think it's fair to say it's quite powerful. Let's look at what adding the Dark type would do to Lunala defensively. At present, Lunala has a double weakness to Ghost and Dark, and that's it. Adding the Dark type would turn both those double weaknesses into a single weakness, and would add new weaknesses to Bug and Fairy. This is overall an extremely positive change. Typically, Bug is one of the least common offensive types in Pokemon, if not the single least common type. Being able to turn 2 double weaknesses into regular weaknesses is well worth the cost of adding a fairy weakness, despite fairy never being a good type to be weak to. While weaknesses to fairy, ghost, and dark might still seem concerning, it's important to consider Lunala's ability. Lunala's Shadow Shield is effectively identical to Multiscale, meaning if Lunala is at full HP, it will take half damage from all incoming attacks. This is an enormous buff, especially when you consider Lunala's incredible natural bulk. By removing 2 4x weaknesses, it will be virtually impossible to knock Lunala out from full HP, making it difficult to play against and increasing the viability of sets with recovery. In terms of resistances, Lunala has never had much to work with, and Dark doesn't do much to change that. Lunala originally has resistances to Psychic and Poison, and immunities to Normal and Fighting. Our new Lunala simply changes the resistance to Psychic to an immunity, and that's it. Not super exciting, but again, Lunala's primary defensive tool is its ability and bulk, and having 3 immunities is nothing to scoff at either. Offensively, this change matters very little, if at all. Lunala originally is able to hit Psychic, Ghost, Fighting, and Poison for super effective damage, and 29% of all Pokemon for super effective, with neither type hitting Dark for even neutral damage. After this change, Lunala is also able to hit Psychic, Ghost, Fighting, and Poison for super effective damage, 29% of all Pokemon, and none of the 3 types can hit Dark for even neutral damage. Incineroar players eating. I think it's funny that this change would be so powerful, but exclusively defensively. If you're confused as to why I think this change would be impactful despite not looking like as big a deal as some of the other Pokemon we've looked at, the short answer is because Lunala's offenses are already good enough. Ghost is one of the best types in the game at hitting Pokemon for neutral damage, and because Lunala already has a high special attack stat and a very powerful no drawback signature move, its pain points have always been its double weaknesses, not its offensive prowess. I really love the idea of giving Pokemon 3 types, but after spending so much time with the topic, I think this is one aspect of Pokemon that really shouldn't change. While I think it would be fun and exciting at first, it's too difficult to balance and would change the series in a major way that would shift the balance too much towards offense, which, as we've seen from Dynamax, isn't especially good. That being said, this was still a lot of fun for me to work on, so I hope it was enjoyable to watch as well. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one on what would happen if Pokemon could learn 5 moves. And if you've already watched it, let me know what you thought in the comments.